Hi, this is Nick from Debunksters, or Debunkster. So far, it's just one of us. I'm looking at this New York Times article again. It's called "How Britain Went to War with China Over Opium." And the sentence I want to look at today is this one right here. This is an interesting claim. To many people in Britain, the notion of going to war to advance the interests of drug dealers against a country that had always been friendly to Britain was abhorrent. Well, that's an interesting claim. Abhorrent? No, not that one. Friendly. Against a country that had always been friendly to Britain. China had always been friendly to Britain? Oh, really now? Let's take a closer look. Okay, let's look, for example, at how the Daogong Emperor treated his own family members who often worked for him. This is somebody called Kushan, which is actually Qi Shan. That was one of his cousins. He represented the emperor in negotiations with the British and negotiated the first peace treaty, which ended up failing because neither the British would accept it nor would the emperor. Anyway, here is how his cousin referred to himself in formal communications. This is directed to the emperor. Your Majesty's slave, Qi Shan, Minister of the Inner Council and acting governor of the Guang, that's two provinces, Guang, kneeling presents this respectful memorial. And down here, previously to the receipt of your Majesty's sovereign commands, your slave had, with a view to preserve the territory and the lives of the people, ventured, himself is what he's referring to, rashly and forgetful of his ignorance, to make certain conditional concessions to the English foreigners. Right? Promising that he would earnestly implore in their behalf a gracious manifestation of imperial goodness. Yet, having done this, he repeatedly laid before your Majesty the acknowledgement of his offence, for which he desired to receive severe punishment. I don't know. It doesn't seem to me terribly friendly to be referring to yourself as a slave repeatedly. Your slave, on his knees, was up here, so you're kneeling. He desires to receive severe punishment. Is that friendly? What kind of a relationship do you have with the emperor? And if the emperor has a relationship like this with his administration, and in fact, everybody who dealt with the emperor had to refer to themselves as being his slave. In fact, everybody in the empire was his slave. The emperor was the supreme slave master of China. That's really what he was. He owned everybody. You were his personal property. Does that sound friendly? If he treated his own relatives like this, because I'll keep going. This gets worse, not better. Why would would you expect him to treat the British well? You know what I'm saying? Especially when the British demanded to be regarded as equals, and Britain was a democracy. This is the 1830s, right? Anyway, so again, with respect to your slave, humbly upon his knees has heard these commands. And down here, but alas, your slave is a man of dull understanding and poor capacity. And in his arrangement of these things he has not had the happiness to meet the sacred wishes of his sovereign. Trembling from limb to limb, how shall he find words to express himself? This is because the negotiations fell through. Okay, but is this, can you imagine addressing, if you're a foreign minister for the current, let's say, Prime Minister of the UK, would you express yourself like this? Would you express yourself like this if you were talking with the President of the United States? I mean, this is really, hardcore despotism, right? You expect people like this to be friendly? And I'll show you how it gets worse. Actually, before I leave this is another page in the same document. Check this out. This is interesting too because of how it shows you how the administration viewed the public. Okay, and again, if you're expecting the Chinese to be friendly to the British, well, you'd expect the emperor to be friendly to his family, which he wasn't often, and he would expect him to have some sort of a charitable view of his subjects. Well, again, this is Qi Shan. Your slave has also made personal observation of the character and disposition of the people of this province. He's talking about Canton, I think, as I recall. He has found them ungrateful and avaricious, putting out of view those who are actual traitors, and of whom, therefore, it is unnecessary to say anything. The rest dwell indiscriminately with foreigners. They are accustomed to see them day by day, and after living many years together, the utmost intimacy has grown up between them. These plain evidences of the want of firmness on the part of the people here give us still more cause for anxiety. In other words, the Cantonese are ungrateful and avaricious. Many of them are traitors, and the rest of them are basically borderline traitors for mingling with foreigners. We can't have that, right? And again, so here you see the attitude towards foreigners are obviously a very hostile, very negative view of foreigners, which is of course why Canada was the only port which is open to the British and everybody else, Portuguese, Russians, etc. Because they look down very much down their noses at the foreign community. So again, when you realize this, would you expect the Chinese administration to be friendly to the British? Okay. And this here kind of foreshadows what's going to happen, but I think it's worth going into as well, because it makes the point even more profoundly. Okay, your slave has, again, this is Qishan, his cousin. Okay, this is the number two. This is the second banana in the empire right now because of his high position. Okay, he's plenipotentiary negotiating with the British in the middle of the Opium War, first one. Your slave has again revolved the matter in his anxious mind. The consequences, insofar as they relate to his own person, are trifling, but as they regard the stability of the government and the lives of the people, they are vast and extend to distant posterity. Should he, in other words, should I, Qishan, should I incur guilt in giving battle when unable to command a victory, or should I be criminal in making such arrangements as do not meet the gracious approbation of his sovereign? In other words, it is a criminal, infraction of my responsibility or whatever. It's malfeasance if I make arrangements such as to not meet the gracious approbation of you, the emperor. I should be punished as a criminal. Okay, think of the basis. Think of how how extreme the I don't know what you would call this sort of arrangement is, where you have to abase yourself. You have to kind of squeeze yourself in this tiny little ant-like size compared to this monstrous, massive, it's almost godlike, basically, emperor. It's what you have to do. It's disgraceful. Okay, if he acts criminally, which is to say, does not please the emperor, in other words, adhere to predict his whims, right? Basically, which is what it comes down to. He must equally bear his offense, and for his life, what is it that he should be cared for or pitied? In other words, his life is nothing trifling. He should be killed. Well, here's the emperor's response. For example, Daoguang, that's the Daoguang emperor, the emperor who was on the throne during the Opium War, the first one. He wrote in one of his memorandum, the English becoming daily more extravagant, I desired Qishan to be vigilant. That's the guy we're just talking about, his cousin. I desired Qishan to be vigilant and take every opportunity of attacking them, i.e. the British. But he has allowed himself to be cajoled by the barbarians, in other words persuaded, without even consulting his colleagues, to give the English Hong Kong, in other words to give them the Hong Kong island, as a place to store up arms and build fortresses, neither of which they wanted to do, and to allow them to continue, again, because, as I mentioned in other videos, the emperor never had a clue why the British were fighting him until the very end of the war, until he'd already lost the war and the negotiation of the treaty was underway, and then he saw the terms and he was like, what the heck did we fight for? These guys don't even want territory, because obviously the British could have taken territory if they wanted it. They didn't want anything. They didn't even want Hong Kong. This is what I could go on and on. Anyway, to give the English Hong Kong as a place to store up arms and build fortresses, of course the British didn't want to do that. Yeah, that was not their interest at all, and to allow them to continue trading at Canton is beyond the bounds of reason. Why did Qishan permit them to take open possession of the island? Well, have a clue, dude. But again, because you can't meet directly with the emperor, because you cannot send memorandum letters, whatever, any kind of formal communication to the emperor. There's no way to communicate with him, which is the whole point of the Opium War in the first place. Was we need to have some sort of avenue of communication or a window with the emperor, or else we're going to be going to war every decade or 2 decades or whatever, because there are always going to be issues which come up, and we need a means of resolving friction. But he refused to open up a window of communication, and this is what you get. Anyway, the Opium War is what I mean. So, how great is the presumption and shamelessness of Qishan to let him be degraded and placed in chains? So this is how you treat your cousin. He loses his office, his position, he's placed in chains, literally, and brought to the capital under convoy, and let his property be instantly confiscated. Okay, and so what happened? According to an official report, this is Davis, the governor, Sir John Francis Davis. He was the second governor, after Pottinger maybe. He used to work for the East India Company. He was not a fan of the war, not a fan of the opium trade either. But he spoke Chinese, could read Chinese, and wrote a number of very interesting books. Actually, he was a very good writer, and he was hated roundly by the trading community while he was governor of Hong Kong. Anyway, according to an official report, seized and delivered into the hands of the imperial treasure. This is what was confiscated from Qi Shan's estate: 682 Chinese pounds of gold, 17 million taels in silver, 11 boxes of jewels. There was a second search in Muzanga, the prime minister. More, 1,438 large ingots of Saisu silver, 46,000 taels in broken silver, an enormous amount of land, 2.5 million mouse. I don't know how much that, a fifth of an acre. Okay, so it's about 500,000 acres of land was confiscated, besides houses, shares in pawnbroking establishments, transactions in the salt monopoly. His fortune at the time was equal to about 8 million pounds sterling. He was enormously rich. But here's the key point. And yet, without a trial, all of his estate vanished at the mere whim of his despotic master. Exactly. So when you're thinking about the Opium War, keep all this in mind. The idea that the Chinese were friendly to the British. Does this indicate the guy who has a friendly disposition to anybody who displeases him? The British are going to demand equal rights. That's going to piss him off enormously. Okay, because he's supposed to be your ruler, your monarch. He's a global monarch. He's the demigod. He's the etc. Anyway, so when Qi Shan reached Beijing as a common felon with a chain around his neck, he had hardly any money to even get food in prison. But more importantly for us is his wives and women were sold by auction to the highest bidders. There you go. Like I said, the guy's the slave master. He takes your wives, sells them at auction to the highest bidder. I mean, just do you really think the Qing Dynasty is the side you want to support in the first Opium War? Really? You really might want to reconsider that. Anyway, the reason he did all this was because he believed that Qi Shan had received bribes from barbarians, from the British. Which again tells you something else. Why would he be so readily, so open to the suspicion that his own cousin would sell him out? I mean, this made no sense at all. You see how rich the guy is. How much wealth could the British possibly offer this guy? The guy's got what was it, 500,000 acres of land. He's worth 8 million pounds. I mean, come on, this is ridiculous. But the guy is so paranoid, right, that even his own cousin, he can be persuaded by the backstabbing, counselors around him, okay, who are always looking for an opening to take somebody out so they can assert themselves into the highest position of authority. The emperor is such a dupe, he's willing to go for it. And he was duped throughout the entire war. He never had a clue, like I said before, he never had a clue what was happening. He was lied to constantly by everyone, including Qi Shan, of course. I mean, they all had to lie. It's just part and parcel of how you had to the person you had to be. You had to be a pathological liar to get anywhere in the empire, and within the administration, that is. Okay, so we've explored the nature of friendly when it comes to family and Chinese subjects. They're both, a hop, skip, and a jump away from being declared a traitor and, receiving an axe on the neck. But what about minorities? That must surely be better. They're non-threatening. They're cute and cuddly. Have Aboriginal villages up in the mountains. Everything's just great. It's like what was that movie? Arcadia. I forget what it was called. Avatar is the name of the film that I was looking for. I've got a terrible memory for names. Part of my dyslexia, I guess. Anyway, everything's just wonderful. Everybody gets along. Everybody's just buddy. Everybody's chummy. That's complete baloney, of course. Aboriginal villages never got along with each other. They were at each other's throats all the time. I mean, the kill rate, the murder rate infanticide rate in Aboriginal villages, which are in close proximity to each other, was about 30%. They murdered about 30% of their female kids, and 30% of the men were dead by the age of 40. Either killing each other within the tribe as they practiced, beating the hell out of each other in preparation for beating the hell out of the other tribes. Aboriginal villages were not peaceful. But let's ignore that. Let's pretend they're all cute and cuddly, because the claim is here that where was it? Against a country that had always been friendly to Britain. Guy's got a lot of incredibly ignorant or incredible amount of nerve to put up a boulder dash propaganda statement like that. Anyway, let's get to the meat of the issue. Okay, this is China's March Toward the Tropics. This is a 1952 book. Goes way back. A discussion of the southward penetration of China's culture, peoples, and political control in relation to the Chinese peoples of South China. So it's the southward penetration of China's culture into the Aboriginal peoples of South China. Okay, Chapter 6, Tribal Uprisings and Military Colonization. Sounds friendly already. Conflicts as a measure of settlement extension. You're going to like this. With the entry of Han Chinese warriors, officials, and settlers into the tribal territories of South China, it is only natural that conflicts would be frequent between the Han Chinese and the tribal peoples, since the latter not only suffered severely from Han Chinese oppression, but were also constantly being forced out of their old land holdings. These conflicts were of all orders of magnitude, ranging from the major conflicts between the Han Chinese Empire and states such as Zhou or Nanyue, Nanchao and Dali's in Yunnan. It was an independent empire that was destroyed by the Mongols, which helped pave the way for the takeover of the Song Dynasty, if I remember correctly. Anyway, some gentleman, some Chinese scholar by the name of Li Zhi, I guess, I can only guess the pronunciation, has compiled a list of these conflicts, usually termed revolts or uprisings in Chinese accounts, but sometimes described as banditry. Well, the British were called bandits too, and pirates and everything else. So basically, the revolts or uprisings. Okay, I'm going to get a drink. I need to clear my throat. I'm back. Anyway, and all of these conflicts were of sufficient importance to be recorded in the Great Chinese Encyclopedia. Whatever that is, I'm guessing that was that one that was compiled in the 1920s and 30s, maybe? Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe it's some Kangxi project or something. Anyway, he has them broken down by distribution within the provinces concerned, but the conflicts are given here merely by province. This is kind of fun. So, in the period, let's say the Warring States period, whatever, 722 to 206, it's BC, there are 6 conflicts. There are 6, basically, these should be thought of as being Indian wars, the same thing as in the United States. You have in the West, you had until, 1876, whenever the empire closed, whenever the frontier was declared officially closed, when the Indian Wars were over. But there were occasional Indian War. The same thing in Russia. When Russia was extended from the east all the way over to the Pacific, there were all sorts of wars, Indian-style wars there as well. And China, of course, had the same thing. As it's an empire, it's huge. You would expect this. So they're recorded in the 722 to 206 BC. There are recorded 6 of these Indian wars, and then the numbers start to rack up precipitously. In the Han Dynasty, that would be BC 207 to 264 AD, 220 about 30, about 2930. 265, 617. This is when China was in all manner of. They broke into all various little empires. Most of them, a lot of them being Buddhist empires that were fighting each other in the name of peace and serenity and whatever. Anyway, so there were we have another 1819 plus 625 recorded. No doubt there were more, but let's say there were that. Tang Dynasty. You have 10, 14, 5, 53, what is that, 25, 30, 82 probably. The Song Dynasty you have, whoa, here it starts to pick up, 46, 112, what's that, 150 something, near 160, 210, 220 and change, so 220 and change is a lot. The Mongol Dynasty is much shorter. What have we got here? 12, yeah, it's less than 100 years. Now we have 11 and 24, so it's 35. And then in the Ming Dynasty, it picks up radically faster. We have 3 and 16, let's make that as 20, so that's 240 almost, 290, and 380. 380. Sound friendly to you? Okay, to wrap this up, I need to go back into the manner in which the various Chinese administrations had interacted in a hostile manner with the British. I mean, I've mentioned before in other videos the Maxwell's experience, where he was fired upon twice. All he was trying to do was buy and sell goods, and he was attacked. In the case of the Amherst mission, it failed because they refused to go through the usual protocol of banging their heads against the ground, loud enough for it to be heard easily by the imperial audience. When they came back down to Canton, they were then ordered to continue going all the way down to the Ladrone Islands, which were infested with pirates. The idea being that the pirates would attack the British ships which the Amherst mission was supposed to embark to get back to England, if you can believe that. Let's see. Lord Napier was basically killed by the local administration. It affected a form of manslaughter, shall we say? I've got into that in another video, but and Elliot and the 300 British citizens were kidnapped basically in 1839. They put under house arrest and threatened with death if they didn't turn over, a huge volume of opium. I could cite that, but I've already dealt with that kind of thing before, so let's look at something else. Let's look at something which kind of helps to explain what was going on. It gives you an idea of what was some of the underlying factors, which are always very interesting in this thing, rather than just because I end up sounding like I'm blaming the Manchus. I don't believe in free will, personally, so I don't think blame doesn't help you understand anything. Anyway, basically, let's just get into it. Otherwise, I'll just chatter on forever. Okay, this is China, A Short Cultural History. C.B. Fitzgerald. This is 1933. He spent a while in China. He's an Australian. It's a very interesting book in parts. Chapter 18, The Economic Consequences of the Seaborne Trade. And this helps explain the enduring Manchu distaste for the foreign community. The jealous suspicion which characterized the attitude of the Manchu government toward the southern provinces had led to the exclusion of the old marts at Quanzhou, it's probably in Fujian province, I'm guessing maybe, Xiamen and Ningbo, which is up by Shanghai, from any share in this commerce, in spite of repeated efforts to effect an opening made by the English, Dutch, and other maritime nations. In other words, originally, the various country national representatives from Europe all wanted to open up their own kind of warehouses and interact directly with Chinese ports, such as Quanzhou, Xiamen, and Ningbo, and also in Zhoushan. But they were denied. All these were all closed down, or else refused. The Canton monopoly, in other words, the restriction of all trade with foreigners to Canton alone, was not imposed through any consideration of favor for the inhabitants of the city. It wasn't because the Manchus were friendly to the Cantonese, shall we say. It was due rather to the determination of the court to limit trade to one port, and that port was to be the furthest from the heart of the empire and the seat of government. Why was that? A variety of reasons. One of which was that the Manchu government remained to the end incurably suspicious of the results of contact between its Chinese subjects and foreign nations. The Yangtze Valley was the most disaffected area in the empire, the region in which the White Lotus and other rebellions took their rise. Consequently, these provinces could on no account be permitted to have direct intercourse with the foreign traders from whom the rebels might obtain assistance. Okay, when the Manchus first came into power, there was a Qing Dynasty holdout here in Taiwan, and who held out from 1644 to 1682 or thereabouts, and so basically they learned a lesson, which was you really want to control access to the ports, because if you want to suppress any sort of rebellion or whatever else, you may need to make sure that they cannot get supplies from overseas or from neighboring islands such as Taiwan or the Philippines or whatever else, or Japan or whatever. So they shut everything down as much as possible, which is why they restricted trade all the way just to Canton. Let's see. The court had some reason for these fears. Contact with foreign peoples did indeed stimulate the latent antagonism to Manchu rule, which is felt throughout the South. In other words, the South was never very positive, was never very embracing of Manchu rule. Every rebellion against the dynasty saw the sympathy of the foreigners. Right. You always want allies. And for example, the Ming Dynasty continued that I mentioned before, that was in Taiwan, whatever else they made use of, as I recall, Portuguese smiths who helped them cast cannon and whatnot. Every rebellion against the dynasty sought the sympathy of the foreigners, and Canton itself, precisely because it was a center of foreign trade, became in the end the focus of the anti-Manchu movement, which it did. That is true. And the last thing is over here somewhere. Come on and load up. Come on, baby. And a 1, and a 2, and a 1, 2, 3. Is this going to take forever? And we're finally back. That was shockingly long. Anyway, their server must be really chewing through a lot of whatevers. Every endeavor of the government, the Manchu government, was directed to preventing their subjects from acquiring any knowledge of the foreigner's culture or civilization. Conversion to Christianity was forbidden, death penalty. Emigration or even travel on foreign ships was a crime. That's friendly. As foreigners were forbidden to learn Cantonese, death penalty for teaching Chinese to foreigners. The trade had to be carried on in Pidgin English. That's where Pidgin English came from, because you couldn't you couldn't learn Chinese, so they invented this trade language out of Chinese grammar and English words mostly. It was composed of English and Portuguese words, often used in a sense unknown to their native lands, and strung together according to Cantonese grammatical forms. Anyway, you get the idea. Basically, the idea that China was a country that had always been friendly to Britain. It really wasn't a country that was friendly to much of any country. It wasn't friendly to its subjects. Wasn't friendly to its other members of the royal family. Wasn't friendly to foreigners. It was a despotism. I mean, ask yourself, how friendly is North Korea to anybody? How does North Korea treat its subjects? And the head of North Korea, Kim Il-sung, whatever his name is, he had his brother murdered in Malaysia, 2-3 years ago. Yeah, the guy's a potential problem. Rub him out. I mean, he's had generals exploded with the artillery shells. Station him out there, tie him to a pole, blast him with the howitzer. It's unbelievable. I mean, how friendly is North Korea? How many international friends does North Korea have? And how many friends domestically does it have? It's Qing Dynasty China was basically a sort of old-fashioned, slow-paced, much less effective, much less pervasive in its despotism because it didn't have the economy to support such a thing, or they hadn't evolved in ways and means to facilitate this kind of thing. The kind of spying that you have in North Korea. There was plenty of spying in China, but not nearly to the same extent. But again, you just wouldn't say something like that. If there was an invasion of North Korea, you wouldn't complain that it was a country that had always been friendly to the United States, or to China, or to Russia, or to South Korea, or to Japan, or to anywhere. It's just not friendly at all. And the Qing Dynasty was not. It wasn't run by a friendly administration. That's just the way it was. Anyway, so I just thought I'd clear that up because I thought it was a really kind of bizarre, fanciful statement. I thought it'd be of interest to you. Okay. Anyway, thanks for listening. I'll catch you next time. Cheers. Out. Nick.